And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 39. To all your listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a photographer, podcaster, and small business owner based here in Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey and share all the knowledge that I gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In this week's episode, we're talking all about niches, or your niches, however you want to pronounce it, talking about the idea of a specialization within your own business or creative field and how you can use that to your advantage to gain more of a following around your own work, and then to be able to actually produce more work and be able to gain more clients and more business in around your actual work. So we're going to be talking about that today. But before we do that, I wanted to jump into what has been happening for me this past week. And the first thing to report is that I wanted to say congratulations to everyone in New South Wales who is coming out of lockdown today as this episode goes live. I won't be coming out until Wednesday, as I don't have my second vaccine booked in until Wednesday, but it's very good for everyone in New South Wales to be able to get back out there, everyone who's vaccinated at least at the moment anyway, and be able to have some sort of sense of normalcy. I know a lot of people have been stuck indoors for quite some time, and this is going to be great to be able to get back out there and get actually moving again in a lot of businesses and things like that. And especially for me as a creative person, being able to get back out there and explore in the world a lot more and be able to go and actually take my camera with me and go explore new places and taking photos and all things like that we haven't been able to do over the past few months. So that is going to be very exciting for a lot of people and great to also have the reverse side of that and being that whole your mental health aspect of actually being able to get outdoors and actually get out of your household, which I know for me is a very freeing thing. So I love to be able to get out there and get out in the wild as much as I possibly can. So I'm really looking forward to that. I really wanted to talk first on last week's episode. Now, if you guys haven't listened to that episode, I would really recommend going back and having listened to episode 38, an interview I did with the boys from Bandwagon Australia. It was a great chat I had with the boys. I really enjoyed hearing their perspective on starting their own business. I think they have a unique perspective on starting it in the actual time that they started and how they started. As they said, anyone can open a clothing brand. Heaps of people have opened their own sort of clothing businesses. But I think from those boys, they really went about it a different way and really talked about a lot of the things that they tried to do to stand out and tried to really position themselves in a way that was something that they really cared about, but also that they thought they could provide to other people. And it really has turned out that they've had quite a bit of support around them based on that. And I think it's no surprise that there has been that support because they're obviously standing very strong on what they believe in that business, and a lot of other people are therefore going to support them. So if you haven't listened to that episode, do recommend going back and having a listen to it. But I really wanted to talk about today the episode in terms of actually me and the interview style and that whole style of episode, because I really enjoy that interview style of episode. Of really sort of has been something that I've been sort of trying to lean towards over the past couple of months. If you guys have been here for a while, I did my first guest episode 25. So over the past probably 3 months, I've been trying to lean into that a little bit more if I'm able to. And it's really something that I enjoy, being able to bring other people on and get other perspectives from other different types of people. I really enjoy being able to hear other people's perspectives, whether it's in business or any type of creative field. I love to be able to hear that and hear their journey and hear how they've sort of tried to come to be and understand different types of things. So I really enjoyed that. But for me personally, that interview last week was probably the worst episode that I've ever had. Now, I only say that from my own perspective. I didn't really articulate myself very well in the way that I was asking those questions last week, and I really reflected on it after the episode. I didn't really enjoy the episode, have a lot of sort of doubt about whether I should even release the episode after I recorded it. And it was sort of a question of, it's hard for me because I can't step away from it, because after the episode I have to go back in and edit it. So I have to hear it all over again and have to hear it in multiple different ways as I go through and actually edit it. So I hear it a few times before it actually gets released. And every time it's like, I don't really want to release this episode because it's not my best, but then I know what I've spoken about on here before, and I've spoken about trying to be able to get your work out there. And even if it's not amazing and up to the standard of what you would expect it to be, it's about having that out there so you can move on to the next stage, because I know the next one is going to be an improvement on that one, because I've had that one now and I've had that one to start to be able to get that out in the door. And as we spoke about on last week's episode, being able to get that first one out there is really how you're going to improve for your next iterations of those different types of things. So for me, for that interview style, it's about being able to interview even more people and be able to get more people on the podcast, because that's the only way that I'm going to improve in that style of actually interviewing other people, is to be able to have them on the podcast. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but the Bandwagon Boys actually released that episode of the podcast that we did, the interview that we did on their own podcast as well. And they released it about 5 days before I released it on my channel. So it was up, and those guys didn't go into anywhere near the detail of editing that I do. I'm a overly perfectionist type of person who really goes in and really edits out all the mistakes, edits out all the bad bits from the podcast that I don't think anyone needs to hear, and all the empty air, all the sort of silences that I don't think people need to hear. Whereas those guys were just like, I'm just going to upload it and just, it is what it is. And they've always had that mentality, and I really respect them for really having that. And ever since they've started their own podcast, they've always been that way and really just uploaded anything as they record, and they're really good in the way that they're able to speak just off the cuff like that, and be able to really talk about the things that they do and just upload it just as naturally as they were able to. But I think that really scared me in being aware that it was out there in the world, that it was almost out there unedited, because I go through a lot of process with this podcast of editing it and trying to make it up to a standard that I feel somewhat comfortable with. I know that there's a lot of things that I can do in the back end after recording this podcast that I'm able to do to be able to make it probably sound a lot more cleaner in the audio editing it. Because if you were to hear the direct audio that comes straight out of this microphone, it's not very good. So I have to do a lot of editing to kind of make it sound somewhat like something you would like to hear. But then also, as I said, editing out all the mistakes and all the bad bits out of the interview as well. So I like to go through that every single week. So it gives me that sort of backup that if something does go wrong, I can always start again. And I do that quite a lot on this podcast, as I like to have these individual episodes where I can sit here and really talk to the microphone, because it allows me just to, if I do make a mistake, I can stop and start again. And you really wouldn't realize, if anyone is probably listening to the your video version of this podcast, if you're sitting down and actually watching the video version, you'd probably see the cuts more clearly in that than in the audio version. In the audio version, it's very easy to hide the cuts that I do make, and I do make quite a few. If anyone's ever seen the behind the scenes of editing this podcast, I make quite a few cuts in the podcast. So it's easy to hide those in the audio only version, but in your video version, you would probably realize it a lot more. And that's something that I've used to sort of aid my own understanding and sort of my own self-doubt around recording this podcast. If I do make a mistake, I know that there's that sort of little bit of a backup there that I can sort of go back on if I do make a mistake. And I think that's been one of the big downfalls to recording this podcast on my own, because I'm not gaining that experience. You don't have that chance when you're interviewing other people. You don't have the chance to hang on, just stop and restart again if I make a mistake. Obviously within some reason, but if I'm answering something or if I'm asking a question and they're halfway through answering it, it really doesn't make sense to me to say, stop, let's go back and re-record that. It really interrupts the flow of the conversation, and you can't really have that many breaks throughout an interview like that. So I haven't had that sort of practice where I'm recording episodes and then just uploading them straight away, like without editing. And there's a lot of people out there who would be able to record an episode, edit for a little while, and then just upload it. And for me, that's not really something that I've ever really had. As an example, last week's episode, it actually took me about probably 10 hours to edit that episode, because I went back over it. It was a hard episode to edit because it was a guest episode, and I had a lot of things how I was recording the episode and the other guys recording the audio on their end, and probably having to bring their audio in and also have your video as well from me and them, and then add in the intro and the outro. There was a lot of other things that added up to that being an episode that did take 10 hours to edit. But also, I had to go through it and actually chop a lot out, and had to really chop up a lot of different parts. The mistake that I've made, and the reason why those guest interviews aren't as successful as they have been, I'm really going to try and get it back around to the point that I was talking about here, is the fact that I don't practice what I'm aiming to do. If I'm aiming to do more guest interviews, I need to make my individual episodes as much in line with that as I possibly can. So if that means that I need to be able to sit down here and speak for an hour without interruptions, without relying on the fact that if I make a mistake, I can go back, I think that leads to me, when I do speak to other people, tending to fall back on that too much and thinking that it's okay to make mistakes. Or not that it's okay to make mistakes, but the fact that if I do make one, it's okay because I can always go back and restart. Whereas when you're with other people, that may not always be the case. So for me, it's about practicing in the environment that I want to perform in. And over the past probably 38 episodes, I haven't always been practicing in that environment, because I've always been in a situation where if things do go wrong, I can always go back and re-edit it, or I can always go back and really have it again. Whereas that would never be the case if I was interviewing someone else. So for me, that is really something that I'm going to be trying to lean more into moving forward. And I've spoken about this on multiple episodes before in wanting to try to really condense the episodes. If you guys have ever heard me, I normally record for like an hour, but the episodes are somewhere between 30 minutes to 40 minutes. So there's a lot of empty space in there. There's a lot of stuff that I do end up chopping out because it's not very important information. Now, for me, that does take up a lot more time. It takes up a lot more time in editing as well. So it's going to be very beneficial to me to really shorten those episodes as well, because it's not going to take a lot of time to actually produce episodes, but then also after the fact, it's not going to take me a lot of time to upload. So really this has a whole round effect of being an improvement. But I think that's one of the next things that I'm going to be really looking towards, because as I said, I really enjoyed those episodes. I really enjoy interviewing other people, and I really want to lean into that and be able to do that more. And I've heard a lot from you guys, and you guys really appreciate those interview episodes as well. And you guys have been really enjoying them. They've been, I think, out of the 3 of interview episodes I've done, they're probably 3 of the highest downloaded episodes that I have. And so that really shows me that you guys are interested in them, but there's also an audience for them out there. So I really enjoy them. Other people enjoy them. So it's really something that I really want to do. So I've got to be able to get myself in that space to be able to practice and be able to be up to the standard to be able to produce those episodes. And I think that is going to be one of the big parts of it, is practicing on these individual episodes, which I really enjoy as well, but also practicing in that style so that I am prepared for when it becomes on the big days where I do have those interview episodes that I may be a bit more stressed for. It's okay because I've got that practice already under my belt. And that's that out of the way. I'm glad that I had that little bit of a spiel there, but I did need to really talk about that, and I really wanted to get that on the podcast because I think that could be something, and I really like to speak about my own experiences because I think it can help other people, and I think people can often tend to be in a position where they're practicing something in a way that's not like how they would be performing on the day. And if you're practicing something with always that effort that you can go back and always edit things, or you can go back and change things after the fact, when it comes time to perform, there may not always be that position to do so. I know in my photography for a long time, I relied on editing way too much. I thought that if I made mistakes when I was out taking photos, it was okay because I could edit all those mistakes out and I could almost like change the whole image after I got home in editing. Whereas that is okay and it's able to be done up to a certain standard, obviously, but the amount of time that goes into that is so much time, and the effort, and it's just not really worth it. You're way better off practicing the skills to perform on the day and actually take the photos right in camera so that you're not having to spend a lot of time editing. And that's the same thing for this podcast. It's probably the same thing for a lot of different things out there. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are relying too heavily on something else that they can do if they do make mistakes, rather than really focusing all their attention into not making as many mistakes as they possibly can in the initial stages. I know it's going to be more stressful early on, but I think in the long term, it's really going to help you to overcome some of those things and really move you on in your career in that journey. Now, I really wanted to touch on the next thing. I really want to move on from that thing now, but I want to touch on something else which happened this week, which was that I opened my wedding photography books for 2023, which means I'm open for bookings now for 2023, which is a little bit scary because that's still about 15 months away, but exciting at the same time because I did have an inquiry a few weeks ago from someone who wanted to book with me in 2023, and I realized that I hadn't opened my books yet for 2023, which I was a bit behind the ball on that because I didn't realize that it was so far in advance, and I always am surprised that people are actually booking in any type of photography service that far in advance. But I'm also very grateful that I'm able to open my books that far in advance and to be able to know that I have work that far in the future. And so that was a big thing for me and for my business moving forward. As you guys know, I only opened my wedding photography business in March this year. So to be able to continue that into 2023 when we're not even at 2022 yet is a very exciting prospect, and exciting for me to know that I'm going to be committing all this time moving forward into that business. I think something in business about sort of the short term and being able to change and chop wherever you really want to, I think it sort of feels more real. It feels like I'm being locked into something more long term, and I really appreciate that and respect that, because in our industry, I don't think you can ever feel like you're that secure. Whereas here, I feel like I'm a little bit secure for the next couple of years, and I'm really like locking myself in for the hard times, in for the good times as well. And I think I'm going to be really moving and progressing, and I'm really keen to see where I am in 2023. It's hard to sort of set your prices for 2023 as well, as I've spoken about on this podcast, being aware of where I am now. But I'm really excited. I'm really glad to move into that next journey and move into that next chapter of my life. Speaking of your next year, I've also released my 2022 calendars, which is something that I spoke about on the podcast a few weeks ago. I think I should have them out by the end of this week. I'm actually recording this podcast on the Wednesday, and I think they should be out on Friday. So by the time this releases on the Monday, they should be live, hopefully. So if they are live, I'll leave a link to them in the description of this podcast if you guys are interested. I think I'm only going to leave them open for a week, so you guys have probably got until the end of next week to get in there and grab one if you're really interested. And this has been something that I've been working on for quite a while, and I've been working on them for the past few years. I've been sort of releasing these towards the end of the year. I was trying to get in a little bit earlier this year, early October. Last year I released them in November, and that was a bit too late, I thought, towards the end of the year. And a few people were a bit stressed out towards the back end, whether they would actually turn up on time in early December, trying to get them out before Christmas as well. And I think that was really important. So this year, trying to bring that forward to early October has been something that I've been trying to work towards, and being able to set myself that sort of deadline of early October. I was meant to release them last week, but I just wasn't quite ready on that. And I know I've spoken about the importance before of having those sort of deadlines and hard deadlines and trying to stick to those to work towards them. And I did have that hard deadline at the end of last week, but I wasn't quite prepared, and I didn't want to release them before I needed to, and I knew there wasn't that much of a big rush on them. So I've moved them back to the end of this week, and hopefully they will be out by the end of this week, and you guys will have already seen it by the time this episode goes live. And now the last thing that I really wanted to touch on was that I haven't been spending a lot of time on Instagram recently, and I really want to touch on this just quickly before we jump into today's topic. But that has been really interesting for me because I haven't been really spending a lot of time, and I used to spend quite a bit of time, and I do enjoy spending time on Instagram, but that is because I've been spending quite a bit more time over on Twitter recently. Something that I really ignored, I guess, for quite a long time. I've never really used Twitter much before. I was on there for quite some time, but I was just uploading a little bit here and there and never really had a look around, never understood how to use it. But I've been using it a lot more recently, and the community over there, especially the photography and the artistic communities, have been really supportive and been really great to be involved in. I think it's been something that I've been really missing on Instagram recently. It hasn't been that community element. And from everything that I hear, it's how Instagram used to be way back in the day, long before I was even on Instagram. I only started my photography on Instagram in 2018, right around the time that Instagram sort of changed its algorithm, and it became sort of that weird mess of everything just sort of crammed into one. I really hopped on there then, and from everything I'm hearing is that a lot before then there was a lot more community on there, and I haven't really experienced that a lot recently. I think for people engaging on Instagram has really, really declined, and I'm not sure whether that's an algorithm thing or whether it's actually the types of people in the communities. It's just not a real spot for that sort of community anymore. It becomes more your business space where everyone's advertising their own business on there, and it's no longer a community space. And I've been really looking for something else to share with other photographers and other creative people. And I've really found that over on Twitter recently, and that's been really nice. So I've been spending quite a bit more time over there. Of course, I'm still on Instagram and still using it, but it's hard to sort of try to spend my time equally between the two and try to spend as much time over on both of them, because they both have different things to provide. And I just wanted to update you guys on that, because I do speak about a lot of social media on this podcast, and that has been one that I've probably neglected for quite some time. I know we've spoken about Instagram, also spoken a lot about TikTok on here as well, and I've been actively using that as well, which has been really hard and really good at the same time. But one thing I haven't really spoken about is my use of Twitter, and so I thought I would bring that up, and I will give you guys an update on that in the next couple of weeks. But hopefully it's been really good so far, and so I can't see a reason why you shouldn't be on there if you're not already. And with that out of the way, let's jump into today's topic, which is all about niches, or your niches, however you want to pronounce it, depending on where you are in the world. It's really all about the idea of whether you should stick to a particular style of anything, and whether that be in any sort of creative field or any sort of your business as well. I think I've really spoken about this on the podcast before. I don't think I've actually made an episode about it, but I've really spoken about my ideas about it before, and I definitely spoke about it in the episode I did last week with the boys. In that interview, we spoke about the idea of not wanting to be too pigeonholed into any particular one thing. And I think that was my idea for a long time, and that I didn't want to have a particular niche on my photography or on my business at all. And I've sort of gone back and reflected on that a lot over the past month, because I don't think that my idea of what a niche was correct. And I don't think it needs to be, you have to be pigeonholed into one particular thing. I just think that it needs to be that your business revolves only around one thing. Now, that's not to say you can't have multiple different businesses or multiple streams of your business. And this was one of the things that I was getting confused on a lot before. And I think with my photography, I didn't want to ever be in one particular area of photography. I never wanted to just specialize in one particular thing. But I think the more and more I look into it, the more and more I know about it, the more important I think it is to really specialize in one particular area. And I think the more you can specialize, I think it's understandable why the more you specialize, the more you get to be known as that particular person, the more actual your business and more traction you're going to get in that area. So I really want to speak about today why the importance of that is, and one of the importance of actually having that sort of specialty. I know for myself, for a long time, I've been doing photography, but for me, that's not really specialized enough. So for me to say I'm a photographer, that's great. But if I was to tell someone I was a photographer, the next question they ask would be, what types of things do you take photos of course. So I have to give them more information than that. I need to be more specific. And so for me, I'm a wedding photographer as my main thing, but then I'm also a landscape photographer as well on the other side. So for me, I never wanted to only choose out of those two. I never wanted to be only one of those two things. And for me, that idea was that if I really wanted to be successful, I had to do one or the other. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I just think you need to have different aspects of your own business for each particular one. But then I think the importance of your niche is that in each of those ones, you need to be very specific. So I think the problem that a lot of people have is they'll say that they're a landscape photographer, they'll say they're a wedding photographer, but within those, there's no speciality in either of those. So for me, for landscape photography, I've tried to really sort of understand what my style is. And I think that really comes over the years as well. I didn't want to be ever really stuck into one style early on, because I never knew that if in 6 months' time I could sort of transfer into something else, because I didn't really enjoy that anymore. I didn't know where my true passion sort of lied in that area. So I really wanted to give myself enough time to work that out. I think that's important as well. And I think that's why I wanted to stay as broad as I possibly could for as long as I could. But I think now I'm starting to work out my areas in landscape photography that I really enjoy. I really enjoy a lot of outback landscape photography. I've sort of realized over the years, like architecture photography is not really for me. I don't love that style of photography. So for me, there has to be some sort of purpose behind that. And that's why I've sort of drifted in that direction. So the more I can fine tune that style of landscape photography, as long as it stays within that idea of landscape photography and sort of refine that, I can still have that on its own, apart from my main thing of your wedding photography. And in that idea of wedding photography, I think it's so important to be able to narrow that down as much as you possibly can, because if you just say that you're a wedding photographer, what makes you stand apart in that? And we've spoken about having your own story, and I think that's important about having the things that you really stand for in your own story. But then what is the actual service that you provide, and how does that stand apart from other services around? And I think that's super important to know what it is that you do, and know that other people can know what you do, and other people can walk up to you and say, and you can give them a direct response on what you do and the services that you provide, because that really gives them a lot more certainty into know what they're going to get out of you. Niches build trust, and they also build that sense of sort of normalcy and understanding that people know what they're going to get. Like for me, if I'm on Instagram and I decide to follow someone on Instagram, part of the reason I do that is because I know every time I see something from them, it's going to be in the same sort of style. I know what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going to get from them. Same if I subscribe to someone on YouTube, for example. It's the same if I tune in to watch some sort of TV show. I know what it's about. If all of a sudden I was watching a show and it randomly changed to be something completely different to that, I wouldn't be very happy, because it's not in that same style that I was after. Because the only reason I'm there to be actually consuming that thing is because I know what they do. Be able to narrow yourself down to that point where anyone else could know exactly what it is you do, and they know you do that the best, I think is really important, and something that I've been struggling with a lot, and something I'm trying to move more into is to narrow myself down in those areas. As I said, you can still spread yourself, and I still do a lot of different things within my business, but I want people to know the exact things that I do, and to be really clear on those things that I do, because I know a lot of the different things that I have done in the past have just been very broad, and explaining those to people, if I can't explain it to someone else, how am I expect them to actually come to me for any type of service, any type of business whatsoever? So I'm really trying to work on that, and trying to work on that in heaps of different aspects of my life. And I've been really open to that idea of sort of being able to grab some sort of your niche or some sort of style that I really gravitate to. I've never sort of known what it is that was before, and I never wanted that to really hold me back. But I think in a way that propels you forward, because it allows other people to know what they're turning up for, and allows more people to sort of hop on the train as well, because they know where it is that you're headed to. I really want to give the example of this podcast. Now, I heard an episode of a podcast a few weeks ago. I was listening to another podcast, and they were sort of talking about their niche as a podcaster. And for me, that has been something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, because this podcast has never been something that has been in a sort of specific type of niche. I started this podcast because I wanted a space to be able to talk about all the things that I go through in my own business, and talk about the ups and downs of my own business. And I really love that I have your voice on this podcast to be able to give that to other people. But I also like that I'm able to look back on these episodes and really remember the things that I did throughout the year. And I'll be able to look back on these in a year's time. But moving forward, I really want to sort of understand what it is this podcast is, because for a lot of people, I wouldn't tune into a podcast if I didn't know what the idea of that podcast was. And so for me, in this podcast, I really want to sort of give that some sort of direction in where I'm headed to. And after last week's episode, I really enjoy that interview style. I really enjoy speaking to other people who really have their own new businesses and things like that, and speaking to people on their own creative journeys. I love really hearing about that type of stuff. And so I want to be able to give as much of that as I possibly can on this podcast, because that is something that I really enjoy being able to do. I enjoy being able to educate some people. And I spoke about it. And I spoke about it on episode 37, talking about imposter syndrome and how if you know more than other people, then you're in a space to educate. And I'd love to be able to educate other people on how to start their own businesses and things that they can do within their own business to be able to market their own business, be able to talk about their finances, things like that. And so I think headed forward, I think that's what I'm going to really try to do with this podcast, is try to gain some sort of clarity about what it is I do. I think I was confused in the fact that I thought I could only speak about one particular thing. And the idea of your niche doesn't need to be around only speaking about one thing or actually producing one particular thing. The idea of your niche can also be you knowing who your target audience is. And I think that is something that was sort of eye-opening for me. I heard this a couple of weeks ago in having a niche be a target audience as opposed to being something that you produce. So for me, I don't just produce podcasts on the same thing every week. I know who my target audience is, and therefore I produce the podcast episodes around things that those types of people would want to hear. So rather than narrowing who my audience is based on the things that I talk about, I'm talking about things based on the audience that I think who I would like to have. And so that is something that I've sort of reversed on. And I think we'll use that as my idea of my niche in this podcast, is actually providing to people who are in positions I was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in really looking at starting their own business and moving forward in those early stages of their business, because that is a position I think I can educate in, having been in that before. I think that is the niche that I really gel into, because I'm not here trying to educate people who have had businesses for years and who've been in this creative space for years. It's great to have those people on. It's great to have conversations with them because I learn a lot from them. But who's going to really gain information from things I talk about? It's going to be people who are at the stages that I was a year ago or 2 years ago. As I said, these are the types of things that I've been speaking about that I'm really passionate talking about, because I don't think there's enough education out there. And I think even if there is, I'm providing it in a different way than other people. And if I'm able to help someone, then that's amazing. And I think for me, I'm helping myself on this podcast. So by that, helping other people, I think is amazing. And so I want to be able to really gel that in and really gain that sense of what it is that I'm speaking about, because moving forward, I really want to be able to know each week the things that I'm here going to turn up and actually talk about. I want to know who the audience is. I want other people to know who the audience of this podcast is, because I don't expect anyone to just tune into every single episode when they're unsure what the podcast is actually about. So moving forward, having some sort of your niche and some sort of clear idea of what it is that I do is going to become really important. As I've said, I don't think your niching has to be all about really narrowing yourself down and only working on one particular thing. Whilst it can be important to be able to have all your eggs in one basket, I don't think that's the case for me. I don't think that's necessarily the case for a lot of different people. I think a lot of people enjoy different areas. And so I'm going to continue to have this podcast. I'm going to continue to have my photography business in probably multiple different aspects. And I may even expand that later on down the track. But I think important in being able to pinpoint the exact things that I do. Important in being able to advertise that to other people, but also for other people to know the actual service I provide. So the more clear cut I can be on the things that I provide within those types of services, I think is really important. And so I'm going to be really looking to be able to do that, because I think that is where that speciality comes in, and people really gravitate towards that because they know that you're an expert in that one particular thing. And yeah, hopefully niching down really first off allows me to actually clear my mind and know what it is that I really need to focus on, and be able to be clear on the things that I do in my own business, and clear on the things that I actually have to work on every single day, so that I know that I'm headed in these directions and only working in those directions, but also other people, that they're able to know exactly what it is I do. And I think that is able to help anyone who's in business, as long as you can be very clear on what your message is and clear on the things it is you do. It's easy to be able to communicate that to other people, and they can then know what you do. And they're more likely to actually be interested in your work if they know what it is they're turning up for. And so with that, I think that is all I'm really going to speak on today, guys. I wanted to keep this episode pretty short, but I think I've spoken for quite a long time because I had a pretty long intro into this one. But I just wanted to give my thoughts on this because the idea of having a niche was never something that I really wanted to do. It was something that I really pushed against for the past couple of years. And it's up until this probably last month or two that I've really sat back and thought about it and thought about the different ideas. As I said, a niche doesn't have to be a specific product or a specific service that you provide. It can be an audience. It can be a different demographic of people who you're trying to speak to, who you're trying to provide to, who you're trying to have as your consumers of your product. So that doesn't necessarily have to really pigeonhole you into only doing one particular thing. If you're targeting a particular type of client, then any service that they would be interested in, that can be your services. So that doesn't necessarily have to pigeonhole you, but that person would know that they're the person for you and you're the person for them because you've really made it clear in the things that you do that you're the type of person for them. So it's not just about providing one particular service and doing that really well. And whilst that is important, I think it can also be about really understanding who your target audience is and having a clear idea on who it is you're trying to provide to. Because once you have that idea, then you can sort of gravitate your products and services to revolve around that type of person who you're trying to sell to. And yeah, that is all that I have for this week's episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and I really hope that you're able to gain something from this and you'll be sticking around to see where we head with this podcast into the future, because I'm very excited to see where this starts to go to more in the future. I'm excited to sort of really gain that understanding of what it is I do here on this podcast and really drive forward with some sort of plan. Up until now, it's been sort of really just an interest project for me, but I'm hoping to really move this into next year and really drive home with a clear idea of who it is I'm talking to and who it is the actual target audience of this is, because I think that's one of the reasons that I've really struggled myself on this podcast is not knowing who I'm really talking to. So hopefully next year we can really continue to drive through the end of this year and move into next year with a real clear idea of who it is this podcast is aimed at. And just before you go, guys, remember that my 2022 calendars have launched. So if you're interested in those, interested to check those out, I'll leave a link to those in the description down below. But until next week, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.